Hi everybody. Today what I'd like to do is to give you some ideas, some tips on how to go about evaluating your sources. Once you get into those databases, once you're looking at those websites and reading those books, things can get overwhelming and sometimes it's hard to separate the junk from the gold. So hopefully with this quick little mini lecture, you guys will come away with some concrete questions and just ideas to keep in mind as you're moving through those databases as a researcher, and make sure you're only bringing in the really solid stuff into your paper that will help your paper gain credibility and help you inform your ideas in a good way, not a way that will damage your credibility as a writer. So let's go on to the first slide here. Question number 1, is the source recent? I put this as the first question you should ask because it's often overlooked. We get so excited sometimes in the databases, we find that source that seems to connect exactly to our argument or exactly to the topic we're focused on, and sometimes we forget to look at when the source actually came out. So we have to keep in mind, information changes quickly. What was true, as I put up here, 10 years ago, not necessarily true today. So be careful. You don't want to bring in that dusty information, especially when it comes to those data points. Those numbers probably have changed in the last few years. So always check the publication date there to make sure that you can accept whatever they're presenting and feel good about it. It's relevant, it's new, it's fresh. And your paper will benefit from using it rather than, whoa, this person forgot to check. This was from 1966 or 1986. Those numbers will likely, have some major changes over time. What I don't want you to think, though, is that the newest stuff is always the best, as I put here in the middle of the slide. Sometimes as a researcher, you want to deliberately find older sources. And by doing so, you're showing your readers that you have a comprehensive understanding of the topic, you understand the history behind your topic, and you're not just focused on, the most recent stuff that has come up around it, in the last year or two or even 5 years. So I put an example on the bottom here. Let's say that you've chosen to write a research-based paper on the Black Lives Matter movement. You probably wouldn't want to focus only on sources published within the last few years. My guess is you'd want to go back to the civil rights era and to see what writers were coming up with then, to see what newspapers were reporting on then, to give your readers some context, to give your readers a stronger understanding of the history behind the modern day movement. This will help your paper. Even though those sources are older, you're doing all of that work as a researcher, as a writer, and by bringing that information into your work, your paper will gain a lot more credibility and just be much more comprehensive. So newest is not always best, but on the flip side to that, especially when it comes to data, to numbers, we always need to make sure we see those publication dates and feel good about what we're bringing into our work. And sometimes we want to go way back on purpose, and that's okay too. No set firm rule, we just want to be aware of those publication dates and how far back we're going. Question number 2, is the source relevant to my topic? So I think the big question to ask yourself as you're combing through the databases is, what will this particular source add to my paper? You're going to find a lot of sources, no matter what your topic is, that are connected to your paper, but will those sources actually add something meaningful based on the direction you're trying to take your work? So you can't read every single source you come across, right? It's just too crazy. There's too much information out there. So here's some pointers to save time. The first one I put up, if it's an old school book, we still use those, right? They can be very, very helpful. Skim through the table of contents, right? You can see what the chapters are labeled as. You can see what the writer is doing, what she's focused on, and get a quick kind of idea. All right, what is the meat of this book? Is it going to help me? Is there anything in here that kind of piques my curiosity that I want to dive into and slow down with? That's a much quicker way of going about it than trying to sit down and, read each and every chapter. That would be silly, right? There's just too much out there. So skim the table of contents. What about those journal articles, number 2? Even those can be long, right? A 20-page article, that can take a long time to read. So what I recommend is to read the abstract first. This is that quick summary/gist of the source and what it will focus on. You'll see this in the database. The abstract will pop up. And I always recommend check that out first before you commit to the full article and plow through it. I think the abstract can really help you see quickly, all right, is this source actually relevant? Is it something that I want to pursue? So check out that abstract. That will save you a lot of time. And sometimes just combing through. Number 3 is that the title will sometimes be a good indicator of, hey, is this something that I want to slow down on, put in my list? I only have so much room for so many sources. Is this one that I actually want to pursue based on just the title alone? And a quick side note is you want to keep this in mind with your own work, especially research-based papers, to always come up with original titles for your work. This is a good message you're sending to the reader. Hey, this is what my paper's focused on. This is what I'm going to look at. Instead of, essay number 1 or whatever, kind of generic title you've saved it as on your computer. I think it's always a good idea to come up with an original title that gives the reader a strong idea of what the paper will focus on just by the title alone. But as a researcher, again, this is a good way to save time as you're combing through those databases. I put a little note here on the bottom of the slide is relevant doesn't always mean in agreement, right? Just because you come across a source that doesn't align with your stance, that doesn't mean you should automatically dismiss it. That's usually a good idea to explore more. Okay, what's the other side think? Or what is this perspective that I'm not in agreement think? And how can I use that information or push back against that information to make my work even stronger? Always be open to multiple perspectives. You never want to research or write with the blinders on. That can only hurt your credibility as a writer. Question number 3, is the source reliable? It almost sounds, redundant. Do I really? Of course, that's what I want to know. But here's the thing is it's harder and harder, I think, now with so much information out there to really kind of sort through what is the reliable stuff. So number 1, the first key I put up here is to play detective and to ask yourself first if the source is peer-reviewed. If you're going through the databases, I think these are the safest types of sources to use, and your professors in the future will agree as well. And the reason we place such an emphasis on peer-reviewed sources is because unlike any internet source that's on a website or a blog post, or a YouTube video or whatever, a peer-reviewed source has to pass through a very strenuous filter of qualified readers and evaluators before it makes it to publication, right? So that researcher, that expert in that field has come up with this research paper that now has to go through this long, laborious process that all these other experts are looking at this work to make sure that it's qualified to appear in the publication. So by the time you see it as a researcher, as a student researcher, you can rest assured that that source has been vetted, it's gone through that very strenuous filter, and it's gotten the green, light to move forward, and we can take that information into our work and feel good about it. What about if the source isn't peer-reviewed? Well, that's where we really have to use our detective skills and start to dig a bit more. Where was this source published? What is this organization or this company all about, and what have they done or published in the past? Do I feel good about this organization or company? Do they have a certain agenda that would make them, prone to dismissing certain information or downplaying certain information, being very biased, very skewed? If so, I need to be careful as a researcher, make sure to read the work with a skeptical set of eyes. And sometimes if that biased perspective is too much, it's a good idea to say goodbye to it or to bring it into your work to really push back against and kind of dissect. So again, peer-reviewed, always the safest bet. And when you leave that safe peer-reviewed world, you really, really want to play detective and make sure that you're asking all those questions. Question number 4, who is the author? This is somewhat related. No matter how professional or legit that individual sounds on the page or the screen, you should always ask yourself, well, what makes this individual an expert? I think this is equally hard on the page. Sometimes if we're outside the peer review world and we see, hey, this appeared in this website, it looks legit, it looks very nice, it's well written, it sounds good, the sentences flow. But who is that person? I might just read it and accept that as rock solid fact, but I better play detective and ask what gives this person the credibility or the right to enter this conversation, and should I take him or her seriously and feel good about using this information? But the same is true on the screen. Right, we have so many talking heads on our news media now and in our social media threads that it's hard sometimes to think, well, that person sounds articulate, right? They're dressed a certain way, they sound a certain way, they look a certain way, so they must be an expert. But again, we need to put the guard up, not just in whatever writing class we're taking, but just as citizens in general. Who is this individual? Why am I listening to this individual? Do I trust this person based on his or her background? The second question I put up here, how long have they been working or researching in this field, right? What are their credentials? And is this person connected to a certain organization, right? Are they being paid? Or does that organization actually increase their credibility? Maybe they're a researcher at this university. They're connected to this medical institution. Who knows? But the important thing is to really peel back the layers and make sure you know who this individual is. And as I put down here, right, it's same deal on the page, who the writer is, same deal when we see those people on the screen. Who are they? Do I trust this individual? Question number 5, how specialized is the source? So I put up here, it's generally a good idea, I think, to seek out a blend of specialized and non-specialized popular sources to balance out your research. So the pros of a specialized source, this is more like a peer-reviewed source, right? It's written by an expert, we know, we feel good about it, it's detailed, it's accurate, it's solid information. There's a downside sometimes, though, to specialized sources, especially for writing for a general audience. Those sources could contain a lot of jargon, that specialized language that readers, your general reader, may not necessarily understand. So, need to make sure that I'm not using too many specialized sources and alienating my readers who are not part of that industry or maybe don't have the same basic knowledge about that topic, because otherwise they just won't know what I'm saying, right? If I keep quoting or paraphrasing material from those types of sources. So we need to be at least conscious of that type of specialized jargon and how we're using it. So here I put an example, right? If I'm writing a paper about, I just put up here, for example, teen mothers, the information and tone I encounter in a Cosmo article will be way different than the tone and the language I encounter in the New England Journal of Medicine. So as a writer of research, I'm not favoring one over the other necessarily. I just want to say, balance and make sure that you're using both of those sources wisely and you're not alienating your readers by going too low with too many popular sources and it's too kind of, hey, this person really didn't go into the database and do what she needed to. But at the flip side to that is that you're not using too much jargon, specialized language that would confuse a reader or make them tune out. Question number 6, should you trust that website material? So now here we are in the Wild West web, outside the peer review world, outside of our database. We don't want to let our guard slip as we're evaluating web-based information. No matter how slick and organized the site looks, we need to ask who is behind this content. Again, do I trust this individual and this organization, or does something seem off? I'm not getting a lot of clarity here on who this person is or what this organization is all about. The red flag should go up. They're not really providing me with much information. Is the information on the site cited? We always have to cite our work as academic writers and show where our information came from. So we better make sure that our websites are doing the same. When they start to bring in, claims and data, where did that information come from? Are they citing it? If they are not citing it, again, that red flag should go up and maybe it's a good idea to get out of there. And then, has the site been updated recently, or has it been sitting around gathering dust? That's usually I need to get out of here moment, right? This site just kind of feels like nobody's monitoring it, and it's definitely something that I don't feel good about. Trust your gut on that one. But again, don't let your guard slip as you're evaluating those web-based sources. You want to make sure to keep the guard up and always play detective. So again, hopefully today you got some good questions to keep in the back of your mind as you're wading through the databases and out there, combing through websites and reading sources, so that you only bring in that good, solid gold and none of the junk. Hopefully it helped. And again, let me know if you have any questions.